Four things to do in this speech. Firstly, some setup. Second, on why we got more support. Thirdly, why this was justified. And fourthly, just some way. Firstly, on setup. First thing to say here is that what positive masculinity likely looks like. I think what it would look like is you're telling men to act in a certain way. It does not mean that men should stop acting as they currently do. It was just more likely you're encouraging them to adopt certain traits. For example, acting more passively, more empathetically,
their military capabilities and defense
and I think it's like the feminist movement was likely to do this in such a way that was likely to portray men in a more positive way when it would be portrayed when you're abolishing gender
expanding the armed
stereotypes.
forces or developing
You're just like more likely to portray men in a way such as that's you're not
to allow for
asking
more
them to
proactive
completely
military
change.
roles,
You're just
such as
asking them to
collective
continue adopting
defense
some
or like intervention
additional
in
things
regional
that would just be
conflicts,
better.
where actually
Next in what abolishing gender roles typically look like, it's just typically more focused on saying things such as men are equal to women, or things regarding the roles and activities of both men and women. And often it's just like a very hard to do to actually completely abolish
which is driven by rising
it was often
security
very
threats
hard to
from
get a lot of
neighboring
support and a lot of
countries,
action
and a desire
and
to actually strengthen these
regarding
sets of
these
alliances,
stereotypes. And a lot of the
particularly
time when they
with
did
countries like the United
when they
States
did
and other
advocate for
regional
abolishing
partners,
gender
right?
roles,
So
often
in
like
this
just
debate,
not done in
then,
a
it's
very
really
good
crucial
way,
and
because
important
you
to
don't have that much
understand that
support from men,
Japan's
especially
remilitarization
because you have to do things
represents
like
this major change from
just like
its
mention a lot of
post-World
things
War
that might like
committed
that
to
men
things
might
like
just feel as if
pacifism,
wasn't very
which
appealing.
emphasize avoiding military
Thirdly,
conflict, right?
we'd
So
like to know that we
this shift
probably
is
wouldn't be
largely
completely
driven by
getting.
increasing
We would
security
still
threats,
have
again,
some
we tell
focus
you,
on
from
abolishing
countries
gender
also
stereotypes,
like
but we
from
just
North
probably
Korea,
like prioritize
Point.
much
missile and
more
nuclear
actually
programs
supporting
and
positive
China's growing
masculinity
military
overall.
assertiveness, right?
Second,
Whereas these trends
then moving on to my argument how there was more support. Under this point, I'll do
the
three
military
things.
capabilities
Firstly,
and
how the
spending
male
to
community will
better
actually
protect
respond to
itself
this.
is something
Second,
crucial
what the
and necessary in
counterfactual
the
will
first
be,
place.
and thirdly,
Because
just some
Japan also
impacts.
seeks to
First,
strengthen things like
how
its
will the male
alliances with the
community
United
respond?
States
I
and
think the
other
first
regional
thing here
partners,
is the male
which
community
actually
is far
aims
more
for a
likely to
more
support
active
the
role in
feminist
regional
movement
security
because the
efforts.
feminist movement is
This is
portraying them
the
in a
main
good light. They are
goal
far
of
more
Japan
likely
in
to
the
not
first place,
contest
right?
the
So we
feminist
tell you that
movement
there
if they
is this
feel as if
urgency to
if they
actually
feel as
strengthen
if
the
they are not
military
being
at the end of the
targeted,
day.
or
But
they
then
feel like they
secondly,
can
what
agree
does
with
it mean
these
to
things or
facilitate
actually agree with what is
remilitarization
being
under our
pushed onto
side?
them.
This relates to our model where our
They're
side
just
supports the active
and we
remilitarization
think
of
that
Japan,
means
right?
overall,
So it basically
if
means
they're
that
more likely to
they
support
would be
and
giving
less likely
support by
contest it, or it
contributing
just
to
means
things like
more support
supplies
for the
or
movement,
actually giving
more
them the
action in general.
resources to do
Second,
so,
on what
right?
the
So there would
counterfactual
be
is, I
this
think the
active
male
support
community
and
right now just feels very
we actually would
targeted
enable
when you
a
do things
country
like try to
Japan
push
to strengthen its military
abolishing
capabilities
gender
and its
stereotypes.
defense
Like they often
posture,
feel
which
targeted,
it
they
could
often
actually
oppose the policies because
look
it is
like
often
various
done in a
actions,
bad
like
way. We have to
providing
talk about
diplomatic
cases
backing
when
for
men were
increased
acting
military
badly. They
spending
often felt
and having
targeted,
that
and
joint
that meant a
military
lot of the times
exercises
the
and
feminist movement
encouraging
didn't
things
get
like
a lot of support
collaborative
when
defense
trying to
agreements
abolish these
with their
stereotypes.
allies, right?
So when you
So
didn't
it
have
also
that much
may
support
look
from
like, for
men, we
example,
thought that was a
sharing their
very bad
technology and
because men were
resources,
the
their
main
intelligence,
actors
which
regarding
actually
this issue. They
advocates
were
for
the
these
main people who had
legislative
to take
changes that
action
allow for
to
a more
actually
proactive military
benefit
role,
women and
right?
actually do
So
things like
what is our path to victory then
actually
in this
like
debate?
just
It's two
mean
things, right?
like have better
We should tell you
environments
that
for women to live
remilitarization
in,
is
and
necessary
therefore
for a
I think
stable,
when we just like push actually portraying them in a more positive way, it just means the feminist movement got more
neighboring
support,
countries like
and
China
therefore
would
they
not
just
get
got
their
more
territory
respect and more
etc.
support,
And both
and therefore
Japan
it
and
was just
South
more
Korea
likely for men to
stands to
support
gain
these
regional
policies and
stability,
actually take
especially in
action
China's
and like
assertive
listen to the
territorial
feminist movement
claims
because they are
and military
painted in a better light. And when you have
expansion in the
that,
Asia
and when you have
Pacific
like more
region.
action,
So in and
which
of
is like
itself,
better
we
in
tell you that
general,
Japan
because it
and
meant
South
like more
Korea
action on
has
current
some
issues
sort of
that they were
shared
trying to
history and
solve.
shared
So what were
interests
the
and
impacts
goals
of this?
in
I
the
think
first place,
firstly you
right?
get more support in
So we
general.
already
Secondly,
and a quick
and
characterization of the
thirdly,
status
there
quo
was less
is that there
abuse.
is already existing trilateral partnerships with the United States.
Okay, so
There
if you
is
look at the
already an
slideshow, it
existing
says that
motivation for Korea to be
this
engaged
whole
in
thing
Japan's
is about enforcing
remilitarization.
gender
So we
roles
think
by
that
asking men to
Korea also gains
act in a
technology
positive
and
way.
intelligence from
Won't you
this, which means
contradict
it's
yourself
actually
in
a
the
win-win
movement if you're
solution
also
at the end of the day,
enforcing
right?
gender
And
roles
let's
but
be
going
very clear
against them
about
at
the
the same
line we
time?
draw
You
here.
need to pick
I
one
think that
thing. You
it's
can't take
not
the
within our
best of
burden
both
to
sides.
defend like Korea
I think
encouraging
we're
Japan to
enforcing
provoke
gender
other
roles.
like nations
Yeah,
and start regional conflicts, but rather
even
we
if we
think that the
were
goal of
enforcing gender roles, we
remilitarization
would
is
still be
rather to
like
promote national security
it
and to
doesn't
strengthen
mean we have to like
existing
completely
allyships, right?
like we
So
don't need
yeah,
to
moving on
enforce
to the
it
arguments
to
then,
such a
firstly,
large
why
extent. Like
why I'll take
it
you
was
later
unlikely
with
you were
South
going to
Korean
enforce
government's
the
interests
really
in the
bad
first
things.
place,
It was just
which is
probably
obviously the
enforcing
burden of
at a
proof
pretty
in this
small
debate in
extent. It
order
wouldn't
to
be
take
that
the debate, right?
significant
So
of an
quick
extent.
context, what are the
So
interests of
next
South
argument
Korean
on why this
government?
was
It is simply
justified. On this
twofold.
point, I'll do
Firstly,
three
able
things. First, what are
like
the
to
goals
able
of
to
the
cater
feminist
and fight
movement.
against North
Secondly, by
Korea and
supporting
other
positive
neighboring
masculinity
countries
would
that may
benefit the
actually
feminist
pose
movement.
threats to them.
And thirdly,
But
some
then
impact.
secondly,
So first,
having
what are
that
the goals
regional
of the
and national
feminist movement?
stability,
I think
which means
the feminist
they would
movement
actually
overall
have
just
things
wants
like
to be
better
respected
security
in the
for their
community.
territorial
They want to
independence,
benefit
etc. Moving on to the
women,
first
but
analysis
to
about
do
regional
this, they have
security.
to have
Know
support. They
that
have to
both
have
South
resources.
Korea and
And
Japan
thirdly,
face
what
a
they
lot
want
of
to create
significant
societal
threats
change.
again from North
Secondly,
Korea, especially
why
with
does
its
positive
advanced
masculinity
nuclear
benefit
weapons
the
and
feminist
missile
movement?
capabilities.
Firstly, the
This is
feminist
to say
movement
that
needs more
exactly because
support,
they're allies,
particularly from
they
men,
have the
because they are
same
the
and
main
mutual
people who are
threats
actually able to take action
goals and
regarding
ideologies.
these
So
issues and fix
the
the
moment
things that
you
these
actually
movements
support
want to
Japan's
solve.
militarization,
So we
South
think of
Korea
what
will
this
have a
means
better
is
and
when you
coordinated
actually just
defense strategy to
promote more
actually
positive
counter these
masculinity,
shared
it
threats.
just means
Because
they get
when
more
two
support
countries
from these
emerges,
men,
they're
better
more likely
speech, and overall, it just means if men support the feminist movement, you are far more likely to get more
As the
change.
saying goes,
So
when there are more
I think
people
the impacts
interfering
of
or
this would
groups
just meant
interfering,
there was
there
more
will be a
change in
stronger,
general, and
in
it
a
was just
sense
better
that
for society.
like
And
teamwork
I think it was
actually
just
exists
pretty
at the
justified.
end of the
We
day.
actually
So
did
under
this.
this argument, why is it
Next
then
and on to
important to
Wei.
have
So why did we
remilitarization
think
and
this was important?
facilitate
I
it,
think this
given
was
the
a pretty
current
important
situation
thing
then?
because
Because
it was
firstly, given the
right
threats
now we
from
just had
North
lots of
Korea,
issues
there is
that
an
the feminist
urgency
movement
to
was
simply
able to
enhance
change.
their
And I think the
compliance
reason
systems,
for
right?
this, it
We
was
need to
often
create
it was very
that
hard
strong
to
base and
appeal to men. It was
foundation.
often very
And
hard for
in
them
terms
to
of
get
like
a lot
the
of support
US
from these
here, we
factors,
tell
and
you
a
that
lot of
as the
time
US shifts its focus
I just
towards
didn't have
like
enough
things like
support
greater
to take
power
immediate
competition,
action. So we
having
think when you get more
like
support by just getting
remilitarization in
like better
Japan
outreach and having
would
more
actually
support
support the
from the
US
stakeholder,
strategic
it just meant
objectives,
you got
which
more
simply
action
leads
in
to
general
like a
for the
strengthened
issues that were
connection
affecting
and
people,
strong
particularly people who are stuck in
like
bad
relation
situations.
between
We thought if we
US
were able
and
to
like
benefit them
Japan
through
and
getting more
North
support
Korea,
and just putting in more action,
and South
was just
Korea.
very
Where at the end of the
beneficial
day,
because it meant that they were
we
able
tell
to
you
like
that it
get
would
removed from
contribute
these
to a collective
situations, and
defense
they were
efforts and
overall just
enhance
having like a better
military
quality of life because they weren't
interoperability
like
and actually
stuck
participate
in
in
like
joint
bad
operations.
situations.
Because Judge, we tell you that US and Japan,
Four things are doing this speech. Firstly, some setup. Second, on why we got more support. Thirdly, why this was justified, and fourthly, just some way. Firstly, on setup. First thing to say here is that what positive masculinity likely looks like. I think what it would look like is you're telling men to act in a certain way. It does not mean that men should stop acting as they currently do. It was just more likely you're encouraging them to adopt certain traits. For example, acting more passively, more empathetically, etc., as stated in the influence guide. And I think it's like the feminist movement was likely to do this in such a way that was likely to portray men in a more positive way when it would be portrayed when you're abolishing gender stereotypes.
and like mutual,
It was like you're just like more likely to
in the
portray
first
men
place,
in
which
a
means
way
they
such
would
as
be
that
able to actually
you're
create a stronger
asking them
foundation
to
to
completely
actually like
change. You're just
cater
asking
to
them to
the
continue
threats given by
adopting some
neighboring countries, right?
additional
But then
things
third
that would
analysis
just
then
be
about
better.
international
And next
peacekeeping
time,
and
what
cooperation
abolishing
and
gender roles
responsibility.
typically look
We tell
like,
you
it's
that
just
supporting
typically more focused on
remilitarization
saying things
policies
such as men are
actually
equal to
position
women,
South
or things
Korea as a
regarding the roles and
responsible leader
activities
in
of
international
of
peacekeeping
both
and
men and
operation,
women.
right?
And often
Because
it's
the
just
moment
a
you
very
enhance their military
hard to do to
capabilities,
actually
South
completely
Korea would
abolish these
actively
stereotypes.
contribute to
It was
things
often
like
very
regional
hard to get
security
a
and
lot of
stability,
support
right?
and a lot of
You would
action
reinforce its
in
commitment to
regarding
multilateral
these
efforts
stereotypes.
in
And a lot
addressing
of the
common
time when they
challenges
did
such as things like
advocate
humanitarian
for abolishing
crises
gender
or
roles, it is often
like
just not done
terrorism
in
in
a very
general.
good
So
way
this
because you don't have that
approach
much support
basically
from
not
men,
only
especially
strengthens the
because you have to
partnership
do things
with
like
their allies, but
just
also
like mention
enables
a lot
South
of
Korea
things
to
that might
participate
that men
meaningfully in
might
the
just feel
international
as if
peacekeeping
wasn't
missions,
very
which
appealing.
showcases its
Thirdly,
willingness to actually
we'd like to
uphold
know
the
that we
global
probably
peace
wouldn't
and
be completely
security,
getting.
which means that you
We would
actually
still
further
have some
enhance
focus
the
on
cooperation
abolishing gender
responsibility,
stereotypes, but we just
like
probably
in the
like
first place.
prioritize
Because the
much
moment
more
you shoulder
actually
a share
supporting
of
positive
defense
masculinity
responsibilities,
overall.
South Korea would
Second,
actually enhance its
moving on to
reputation
my
on the
argument
global
how there was more
stage,
support. Under
fostering
this point,
trust
I'll
and
do three things.
like
Firstly,
collaboration
how
with
the
other
male
nations,
community
which
will
is
actually
obviously
respond to
crucial in
this.
the first
Second,
place.
what the counterfactual will
With all
be,
those
and
reasons,
thirdly,
I'm
just like
incredibly
impacts.
proud
First,
to
how will the
propose.
male community respond?
Even positive masculinity would expect things from men, some things that they wouldn't want to do. The government were really vague about what it is, what it looks like, what this looks like. So let's clear that up in my setup. Firstly, what are the features that separate positive masculinity from abolishing gender roles? I think within positive masculinity, there's still a conception of what men have to do. Like, for example, family leadership, i.e., in this world, the man would still have to be chivalrous. They still have to take responsibility for things because that's a positive masculine trait. They still have to be respectful to women. They still have to like be the breadwinner of the family, or at least like support the family in a sense. So, and like this is just developed in ways that are more encouraging underside government because women would still expect things from the man, and I think oftentimes those expectations can be somewhat unreasonable. Secondly, the feminist movement has a lot of social capital. They have many supporters and factions. I think government sort of assumes that the feminist movement is one homogenous body who always the same beliefs. So then, firstly, the feminist movement ought to be principally consistent. I think the first reason, in the past, the fundamental beliefs of the feminist movement was what brought people into the movement and what's made the movement what it is today. Changing any of those principles would go against like these morals the feminist movement was like built on. But secondly, the fundamentals themselves were like about absolute equality for women. They were about giving equal opportunities to women. This meant that they shouldn't settle for anything less. They shouldn't make any concessions in fighting for their stands. And insofar as they've gone this far and are well on the track to achieving these equal opportunities, we don't think they should diverge from that path. So then, but why does government force them to make these concessions when they like enforce like positive masculinity? Because positive masculinity is still masculinity, even if men, like for example, respect women or they're are more like caring and like or more thoughtful, they still have to be like have some sort of strong role within the family. They still ought to make small chivalrous sacrifices every day. What this means then is at the end of the day, women simply don't have the same opportunities as men in this world because like it might be true that these two both members of the couple can work, like they can both be breadwinners in the family, but at the same time, like if you have like a child at home example, if someone needs to take care of the house, that means that the responsibility will naturally fall onto the woman in that sense, because a man does have to be chivalrous. They don't want to burden the woman, because that's not positive masculinity, guys. So then, I think in the vast majority of these circumstances, where even if there is the possibility for you both to be equal, I think at the end of the day, the man's going to be the one taking on the vast majority of the burden, and at the end, reducing the opportunities for women. So then, principally, the movement ought to be consistent. They ought to fight for its own beliefs and not switch away from those beliefs. If the movement were not consistent, they'd be hard to predict. I think there's numerous harms of the movement not being consistent. I think firstly, they'd be hard to predict, and I think that means it's hard to cater towards them, because right now, politicians already find it hard to cater towards the feminist movement, considering there's such a big body. There's so many different factions with different own beliefs and stuff. That's why, for example, the movement lobbies local politicians, give them data to help them make policies, etc. But now, when the movement is far more inconsistent and more unpredictable, it's far more harder to get social media support, get politicians to support and make policies catering towards the feminist movement. So then we get concrete, just less support for the movement on our side. Secondly, their supporters and this means that the supporters and satisfaction with the feminist movement would fluctuate. I think I think the feminist movement ought to be somewhat consistent. I don't think that I don't think it would be good to see spikes in whether people support the feminist movement or not. So then, whether this goes good or bad, I think that means that there's still some fluctuation in how much capital the feminist movement has, which affects their ability to organize and plan lobbying or making changes, etc. But the next thing, just historically, it would be immoral to deny what the thousands of radical feminists have sacrificed in the past to get to the movement to where it is today. They fought for those exact morals, and now you're turning on those morals. Then it's already a principal harm in government that I explain occurs when you enforce toxic masculinity. So secondly, why our side is more likable. So I think this point is especially important, is because the feminist movement is a social movement, and it relies on buy-in from supporters to function. So then, if I explain why buy-in is decreased any amount on their side, I think it reduces the overall power of the movement. It reduces, for example, their ability to mobilize the movement against injustices in society. So then, if I explain this, huge harms to government. Firstly, why this leads to internal conflict. There are contradictions. So as government already pointed out in a PI response, there are contradictions to the ideas within the movement. For example, what I mean by this is to abolish gender roles or make men act as the trade-off, the contradiction is to abolish gender roles or to make men act a certain way. So then, if you're not particularly focused on either one, you can't really take both, right? I think that's the least internal conflict, internal contradiction. That seems like double standards. That's what people call out the movement for. When that's what most conservative men, the haters of the feminist movement, call out the movement for having double standards. You're already enforcing double standards. You're already being extremely vague. That's going to get called out and reduce the power of your movement. Secondly, I think also government makes a mistake of assuming that the movement is one homogeneous body. I tell you, there's numerous factions within the body. For example, you have people who are more more pro-abortion, or more people who are more radicalist or are ready to input a lot, and those people that and then there's feminists who don't really do anything, but they just silently support the movement. So then, I think what you do is you lose the most diehard, you lose the most committed, you lose the most radical and the oldest supporters of the movement, who were the ones who were fighting for these old morals in the first place, because now you go against those old morals. So then, I think you lose some of the people who have committed the most investment into the movement. You lose those people, or at least some internal conflict within the movement. I'll take the POI.
Oh yeah, sure. Don't you feel that it's principally inconsistent that men in your world aren't going to be caring or considerate to their wives, but at the same time they are going to be willing to accept you changing the entire definition of gender roles? Please explain.
Well, we're not saying that they would be caring. They wouldn't be caring or considerate. Now we just give men freedom to do what they want, and I think that naturally that freedom does coincide with respecting women, because those are these type of men who have been supporting the movement in the first place. But I'll explain that in my second reason, which is that support from the feminist movement, because they told us that government told us that men would agree with what is being pushed upon them, and thus they would support the movement. Just pretty unsure mechanism. I think rather men would hate it more if they had now to do do things, like conservative men on both sides wouldn't be affected. But like the current allies of the feminist movement, the existing progressive men who support the feminist movement, and this like number of whom is increasing like as time goes on, who have supported the movement, and they would just buy out because they originally supported abolishing gender roles, and they support now. Now you do a 180 and support double standards for them. You push more burden onto these men who didn't want to do those things in the first place. So then I think you would automatically lose this male like male supporters. What male supporters you already have, they feel less included, and they don't feel like they've been betrayed. They feel like they've been betrayed by the movement. But thirdly, there's more inclusive messaging. That means that, for example, the LGBTQ movement is more likely to support the feminist movement as well. One of the feminist movement's greatest allies. For these reasons, proud to oppose.
Judge, the feminist movement needs more supporters to be able to succeed. We thought by including positive masculinity, you're just able to include more people into the movement. And so I'll do 3 things in this speech then. First of all, on extraneous responses. Second of all, substantive on why you would choose toxic masculinity. And thirdly, weighing. First of all, on the extraneous responses, biggest push we hear is about why it is bad being inconsistent. We thought, first of all, we still thought like being inconsistent. We thought that being inconsistent was not necessarily going to be a really bad thing. The many movements have like extremely diverse ranges of like things that they support. The environmental movement doesn't just support like using green energy. They may also support like lots of other things. So we thought like for the feminist movement, in order to grow as a movement, you do need to also like cater to lots of different like you need to be like far more inclusive to also get like more supporters. Under their push, which is governments just find it a lot harder to cater for the feminist movement because like of all of the things they're including. We thought most of the times governments were likely not to be supporting like many of these feminist movements. We thought like for reasons like it can be like some of their voters may find this extremely unpopular. We thought in the case where you include just more people in the movement, you're far more likely to get government support because it includes more it includes more people in the population. So governments will find it far easier to be able to like include these people. On the point which they say people are simply going to just stop supporting the movement, we would simply tell you that we get more support from the male community. They tell us that men will simply buy out because they're being told to act and will feel betrayed. I thought PM already told you why like the positive masculinity was not going to be showing men in a really negative light, which would essentially betray them. We thought it was simply going to be true where like they were going to probably just tell men that you should be more like continue acting like the way you are, but also just being more sympathetic, empathetic, and have more of these positive qualities. We thought even if this isn't true, we just thought the counterfactual, which would just be like that you would basically try and abolish these gender roles, which is far less likely going to work for the reasons why it can just be really hard to abolish these gender roles, and most people are just unlikely to support men are just simply unlikely to support that, and you lose out on far more support when you try to abolish these gender roles. So why then is it better? Why is there going to be less toxic masculinity? Under this point, 3 things. First of all, what causes toxic masculinity? Second of all, why positive masculinity was likely to be extremely effective. And third of all, the impacts. So what currently causes toxic masculinity? I thought most of the times, currently there are a lot of women stuck in abusive situations. Although people are trying to take action, it's very hard because you need to change the mind of men rather than trying to abolish these gender stereotypes, which is largely ineffective for the fact that it can be really hard and men are far more likely to feel betrayed in these situations. We also just thought there wasn't enough support and it was likely to be caused by what is being pushed onto them, etc. So why was the positive masculinity going to be extremely effective? We thought, first of all, they're not being completely forced to change their character. So this basically would mitigate most of the impact which opposition is trying to push on why like people feel extremely betrayed. We thought it looked like making more minor changes, and for the majority of like men who for majority of people, like making these minor changes is far easier for them to cope with as opposed to just simply being like told to abolish these gender stereotypes, etc. And we thought it just looked like adopting a few characteristics, especially for people who were like very set in the ways. You get far more support for them. And we also just thought like from the women, like feminine community, you're also just likely to get more support from this. And so therefore you're able to make more changes towards these issues. What were the impacts of this then? We thought you just had more action from people because like you reduced lots of levels of toxic masculinity because positive masculinity was likely to be extremely effective at changing them. But we also thought this just looked like there was better situations for these people in general. And this was just going to be largely really good for people. For especially like those abused women in these dire situations where they're unable to change. So what is the weighing of this? We just thought on our side we're just able to get an increase in supporters, and this was just going to be exclusive on our side. We thought we were also able to get the people who are unlikely to completely change their views. It was probably unlikely to completely change their views by abolishing gender stereotypes, abolishing these gender roles and stereotypes. It was far easier to just be imposing like positive masculinity as a mechanism in which they are able to change. So Jaja, I told you at the end of this speech, basically, first of all, I basically given you a substantive on why we're able to reduce toxic masculinity, and we're, as a result, proud to propose things.
The issue for this OG was that they needed to prove I was exclusively important that the feminist movement spread these messages. And we told you that they never did that. That was for the simple reason that men and everyone else in the world were already told to be nice. These were people that were already told to be empathetic. These were people that were already told that they should be a good human instead of a controlling freak. And that was the difference, right? Because you already had a ton of those messages, whereas you had very, very little messages spread by anything other than the feminist movement telling you that abolishing gender roles was an extremely good thing. Our benefit was far more exclusive, and that prima facie is why we should already take this debate. I'm going to go through 3 issues in this speech. Firstly, on the principle. Secondly, I'll ask how effective will the feminist movement be at spreading this message? And thirdly, I'll ask how does this impact the behavior of men? Let's start with the principle. Strangely, zero response from open government, because what Martin showed you in this principle was that you spit on the graves of everyone who came before you. You spit on the feminists that wanted to abolish gender roles. They sacrificed their lives. The suffragettes who tied themselves to things like train tracks in order to achieve this very, in order to empower future generations to achieve this benefit. These are the people that you let down. And on top of that, we explained that the way the feminist movement gets buy-in in the status quo is by telling people that they want to abolish gender roles, is by appealing to people who then donate to them. So to deviate from that type of message when you've extracted all of that from the people in the very vulnerable positions which they are, is just something which is principally abhorrent, and is a reason why feminists ought to stay true to their messaging, ought to stay true to their consistent messaging, which in the long term will be far, far better. Next then, let's ask how effective will the feminist movement be at spreading this message? Notably, the burden of OO in this debate is not to prove that, well, every single person in the world suddenly wishes to tag along with the feminist movement. It's just to prove that there's a level of buy-in that will allow us to access the benefits, that the majority of people, or even a minority, cling onto this benefit in a way that is substantially good. Why? Why are we generally quite effective? The first thing we point out is just the feminist movement has lots of capital right now. For one thing, they're very, very social. They have a lot of social capital because most countries are far more progressive now. But for another, it's that they're very, very politically powerful because the equality of gender in a lot of countries is something which is incredibly important. But thirdly, we point out that they get a lot of donations. They're one of the largest social movements, and all of that should point you to the fact that they're able to get this message across, that you're able to access our benefits eventually to a large degree. And look, fine, we can see that we won't get all of these benefits immediately, but there will still be time. There will still be organic change, the end point of which is far, far better than any other team can deliver in this debate. Comparatively then, why is our message even more palpable than OG's to the general public? I think the first thing we point out is that men do not enjoy gender roles being pressed upon them. Men don't want the responsibility every single time of being forced to feed their family. That is very, very stressful. They don't want a structure imposed on how they want to live their life. It is stressful. It is toxic for them. And for these men under outside the house, we eliminate these burdens on them. We enable them to make of their life what they will. And that is clearly something these men will enjoy. But secondly, we point to the fact that we can leverage support from a lot of other movements. This is in a far more intersectional manner. So for example, we can leverage support from the LGBTQ movement because these are movements that all support abolishing gender roles writ large. And this is far, far better for those outcomes as well. But thirdly, we point to the fact that it's a message which has historically been pushed much more, which explains why it's probably easier for people to continue on this current track rather than moving to an entirely new track, which is relatively new. Opposition says one main thing to this, which is just that men feel targeted when you push abolishing gender roles. Firstly, as they explain, this is obviously contingent on the feminist movement doing this in a bad way, and that was unlikely for the reasons we already give you. Intuitively, ask yourself, will the feminist movement, a well-funded movement with lots of capital, with men in their ranks that would know how to do the messaging, will they say something like all men are evil? That's why we need to abolish gender roles. Like, clearly that's not the case. It's going to be things about offering opportunities to women as well. This far more palpable for the majority of men. But secondly, we point out that you probably feel even more targeted under their side of the house, and we posit that as a far larger degree of harm, because under their side of the house, they're specifically telling men how to act in ways that often seem extremely derogatory, coming from the feminist movement itself. Telling you that you need to be more empathetic, that you need to do all of this kind of stuff, is just a way to get your movement absolutely hated by this group. But finally, under this issue, let's talk about the power of the feminist movement writ large. Because what Martin explains to no response is that there's internal fracturing, is that there's internal disagreement. It's that factions exist in the social movement, and for those people, you rip away the most hardcore feminists, the ones who want equality. That is all very, very important to them. These are people that are now disillusioned. They're no longer buying under your side of the house. The impact of this entire theme was twofold. Firstly, your ability to spread all this was entirely just screwed. But secondly, the sustainability of feminist advocacy in the long term was also screwed because you lost your support base. You lost the people that were most invested. These were people that are disillusioned, and you pressed upon the rest of society a message that they did not want to take. Closing.
All right. If you want to claim concurrently that radical tradition is the reason why you support your side of the house, and at the same time also claim that it is these radical traditions that stop people from changing society writ large, then what exactly is the principal claim on your side of the house?
The principal claim is just like that people like sign on to the movement in support of this kind of stuff. They continue. I'm not sure what your POI was getting at there. I assume the rest of my speech will answer it. Okay, finally, let's talk about how this impacts the behavior of men. Notably, this is a theme which is necessary for any benefits to eventuate, but is extremely underexplained by OG. But let's be generous. Under OG, the best case is that some men become nicer to humans, they're more empathetic. That is clearly something which is good. But notably, as I pointed out in my introduction, there are many, many other pressures to just be a nice person in the first place. Things like teachers, or there's already a lot of messaging in the world just to be kind, just to be a better human. But secondly, we know that it's very, very hard line to actually press, right? Because under their side of the house, they still support having stereotypes about men, which is that men need to like provide and all that kind of stuff. And it becomes very, very hard to differentiate exactly where providing is a good thing and exactly when those men become extremely overbearing, which is extremely, extremely difficult in terms of its impact on the world. Under OO, I think we abolish gender roles to a larger degree. Let's then answer closing's POI to Martin, which is why is abolishing gender roles a good thing? I think what this does is it allows people to make of their own identity what they will. It allows them to shape themselves. It allows them to self-determine. Men and women do not fall into specific predetermined boundaries. That's why you want the abolishment of these gender roles so that people can individually craft what is going to be best for them. They can individually craft their own situations instead of being told that they must stick to a single one. That is obviously extremely harmful, and we have decided to solve that benefit. Notably, being nice is a universal tenet, but abolishing gender roles is not. That's why our messaging is so much more comparatively important than opposition's. But finally, we point out that since opposition still leans into gender roles, that is still a very, very bad harm. Men don't support this. Women don't support this. Like, no one really supports this kind of stuff. So, at the end of this debate, I think it's a pretty clear win.
I think a problem that plagues both opening house of today's debate is the very simple fact that they don't recognize that this debate isn't about the basic granting of rights towards women. It's not about equalizing the societal outcomes they want for women and men on both sides, right? To the extent to which that is the biggest benefit they try to claim on their side of the house, we think that the opening half has become irrelevant. Now, what is this debate actually about? I'm going to tell you that this debate is about, first of all, intersectional liberation, as DLO points out, right? The liberation of different societal sectors is the end goal of the feminist movement. But why is this the case? First of all, two structural reasons as to why this is the case, right? So first of all, it leads very directly towards the dismantling of the patriarchy, right, which is essentially the end outcome that the feminist movement wants. The reason for this is very simple. It's because if you restructure your society around, for instance, people on the ground and the most disadvantaged, that is the point at which that's the point at which like the justification for patriarchy becomes fundamentally unsound, right? Second of all, is that it provides better outcomes for women in general. The very basic logic behind this is that if you want a better vote for women, you might as well provide a better vote for everyone in the society at large, right? Therefore, I think that this debate is not simply about whether or not you want to destroy the notion of gender in and of itself. I think it's very simply the fact that you have to recognize that at the core of all these problems is the scourge of late stage capitalism, right? The depriving of most men of their patriarchal dividends is the very reason why the whole problem exists in the first place. Therefore, the metric and the delta by which we weigh above our opening is our basically analysis as to why toxic masculinity as a phenomenon exists in the first place. For that, I'll move on into a few responses about side opposition, right? So I think that there are two very core assumptions to your case. First of all, that the abolition of gender norms is something that is so radical that it cannot be replaced by any other movement within like the feminist movement. And second of all, the fact that you're going to lose a lot of buy-in on their side of the house, right? I see that I'll flip like the whole buy-in point on them like in just a bit, but I like to engage with their whole like principled claim about how it's the most like logical extension of what it means to be a feminist, and especially so considering previous like radical like feminist tradition, right? Now, at the point in which they try to claim that the institution of these gender norms that still exist in the first place is a fundamental misconstruement of what it means to be a feminist in the first place. I have to point out this is already principally wrong in of itself, right? We see that the first and second wave of feminists in the days like before, in like the past, were basically fighting for the same amount of equality of expression for women in the first place, right? We see that the end goal of these first two waves of feminism was not, for instance, the abolition of gender writ large, but at the end of the day, just the securement of free discourse both politically and socially for women in general. At the point at which this has already been reached, we can very assuredly say that the motives of the first and second wave feminists have already been achieved. Now, on this second point about how like being forced into a gender role is not something that most people consent to, that most people are willing to do, right? We see that at a point at which they're able to recognize that, for instance, like intersectional liberation is something they want on their side of the house. At a point at which, for instance, transgender identities are already something that are validated in today's society. There's a point at which I don't see how there's any like enforcement mechanism as to how exactly like people other than men are pushed into these societal norms, right? Therefore, it's very difficult for me to believe that at the end of the day, it is these people who are the most vulnerable stakeholder in today's debate, and therefore the fact that like we can't just push them into a norm and this norm somehow didn't exist in the first place, right? Okay, now on to our main like positive material as to how toxic men actually are the core issue of today's debate. Now, 2 points of analysis as to how toxic men even arise in the first place, right? And to deal with these core issues is to secure a better future for all women as laid out in the characterization. First of all, the concept of aggrieved entitlement, right? What this means is that essentially under late capitalism, with the deterioration of, for instance, the falling rates of profits, right, becomes a necessity for large corporations that employ thousands or even millions of men to want to reduce their wages as much as they can, right? This such that they're able to extract as much surplus value as they can from the labor of these men. At the point at which these men are not being paid equally for their labor, that's the point at which they are going to feel a sense of aggrieved entitlement, right? Because their dividends as the superior figure within a patriarchal society are one that isn't being fulfilled by the society in and of itself. Therefore, it becomes very, very easy for these men to blame all their issues on other stakeholders outside of themselves in general, right? It's very easy for them to, for instance, blame women or even just like minorities entering a country in general for their falling wages and basically just act out on these impulses rather than improve themselves, right? Therefore, it means that at a point at which government or opposition don't really contend with this like societal structure in of itself, there's a point at which they can't actually claim the amount of analysis they're doing right now, right? And therefore, it means that this also means that for the feminist movement to promote like more positive masculinity, this would look like, first of all, the campaigning for equal pay for like towards of like just labor and value in general under like all sectors of society, right? Includes men, includes women, includes those in the LGBTQ community. Therefore, no thank you. I think the end goal in which we are trying to achieve on our side of the house is a world in which people are paid equitably for their labor and not being exploited by the very society that they didn't buy into, right? Therefore, at the end of the day, this means not only that men are going to treat women better, but also that men are going to be more satisfied with their lives in general and therefore ensure better outcomes for the women. Even if, right, we accepted that these unequal power structures are going to exist in the first place, it becomes much more believable on our side of the house that these men are going to grant the women under them a better quality of life. Now, Second, I don't know, reason as to why toxic masculinity exists, right? It's very simply like the societal conservatism and the way that men are socialized in general, right? We see that the main issue of what plagues women in today's day and age, like for instance, the wage gap, for instance, violence against women that still exists in society today, right? It's the very simple fact that most men are socialized to view themselves as domineering creatures that are supposed to control those under them, and those under them being women, right? Therefore, it is only on site, I don't know, it's only on site opposition side. It's only on site opposition they're going to have the very unique principal harm of men still being able to be socialized as men themselves, and therefore like having the urges and like the societal impetus to want to cause harm towards women, right? We see that at the end of the day, the most likely outcome on our side of the house is that women are going to start opposing the ways in which men are traditionally like socialized in general. Therefore, it leads not into the dissolution of the entire like gender binary as a concept, but rather in the very simple deconstruction of like the mechanisms in which men are taught. For instance, changes in curriculum to tell men that they're not supposed to be like, I don't know, all domineering, muscular, like super stoic creatures, right? We see that at the end of the day, like what we really need is for men to like basically what we need from men is basically to experience their humanity as a whole, and not as a concept of what a society under late capitalism tries to force onto them. Therefore, at the end of the day, outside the house is a world in which everyone is benefited. Go inside CG.
We agree with CG that the main metrics of this debate should be which team fulfills the goal of the feminist movement, which is women's empowerment. Four main criteria, I think we should judge by this metric. Firstly, through support. Secondly, attention. Thirdly, through creating legitimate change. And lastly, to support their dignity. In my speech, I'll prove to you why CO does the best job in fulfilling all of the ways to empower women and why we take this debate home eventually. First of all, moving on to opening government and few rebuttals to them. First of all, opening government is simply boxed out of this debate from the moment that they want to do both abolishing gender roles and asking men to change and be more positive. These two things can coexist, especially considering that the impacts that they're trying to push, which is men, won't be hostile because they will be nicer to a man in the first place. Aside, note that opening government side's arguments and points are all based on the premise that these movements will gain attention from the male and general public in the first place. Why is this untrue? First of all, three layers. Opening government side does not prove this in the first place on why they will be able to get a lot of attention and mobilize support. Secondly, under the lines of what opening government says, we think that these movements will be extremely soft and nice towards men, even on their best case. Note that this is ineffective, which will be proven more on later, because simply having a soft stance is similar to a social movement that isn't interesting and isn't going to gain a lot of interest from the social public. While we agree that men will be enraged with this movement in most cases, if it succeeds, it's more likely that the movement wouldn't succeed because it's so implicit, which would be the better rebuttal to this point because they don't gain any interest in the first place. Thirdly, women aren't likely to opt into movements that focus more on the actions of men instead of empowering them. Note that the feminist movement also needs to gain support from both women as well. Trying to look nice to men and shifting the focus towards talking about men not talking about their gender roles isn't that attractive to women, which is why women wouldn't opt into that feminist movement in the first place, which is why the feminist movement wouldn't be that effective. Secondly, targeting men and sometimes holding them accountable is better in two ways. First of all, we gain attention from the public because even if these individuals are radical in some kind of cases, this makes men gain interest, and both women interest because there are people who are talking out for them as well. Secondly, we create at least some sort of change. Let's be charitable and assume that all of the things that opening government said are true, and there's actually some kind of social change. However, women still have to stay in houses and take care of the kitchen and take care of babies, and all the women have less opportunities. All you have is a better husband on their side of the house as well. Even if OG fully succeeds, the impact that OG brings to this debate is so small, which is why OG cannot win this debate in the first place. At least on our side of the house, women can be more women can have more dignity, which we'll explain furthermore on in my extension. Directly move on to let's clarify a few things that opening opposite side were lacking in today's debate. First of all, opening opposite side has good principle, but they completely lack a mechanism as to why a majority of men would surely be offended by this movement. So let's add to a mechanism on why this surely leads to less support from the feminist movement if it actually succeeds. First of all, reverse discrimination currently exists because the history of women's rights is being infringed. Sometimes even opposing itself or exercising your freedom of speech is considered anti-feminist. Gender being the reason why you're accepted at university, women's parking garages in South Korea, and etc. Most men aren't against the feminist movement had it not been a reverse discrimination or oversensitive thing. The current status quo points out that men are somewhat wary about their rights being infringed. For these reasons, only on closing off, we properly provide to you this movement will only lose support through positive masculinity, even if it actually succeeds and gain interest, which is untrue in the first place as well. But let's move on to CG. CG unfairly characterized how the status quo looks like in the first place. But what's the extension coming from closing government side? They talk about how it's very easy for toxic men to blame the woman for failing wages, and by them not getting exploited by being society, men are able to get more satisfied and no more patriarchy anymore. We're not sure why advocating for positive men's traits deletes all of the toxic traits and solve the issue for wages and wages and issues on their side of the house. It's more likely that CG's role will just lead to men becoming more superior over women because they're just enforcing the characterization that men are more superior over women, and they should do the roles as working outside and becoming the breadwinner of the family. CG's extension only works with countries that have a good base of feminism in the first place, which is why CG's extension is also quite irrelevant in today's debate. With that in mind, move on to extension on why this undermines women's capability. What's the underlying premise of this argument? The supporting positive masculinity isn't directly correlated with upholding women's rights. So what's the mechanism? First of all, the whole purpose of supporting positive masculinity is to get the men to be more nicer to women and be more friendlier to their surroundings. Note that this undermines women's capability in so many ways. First of all, this lowers capability for the women to actually make changes. The most they can do in both governments' world is to ask for support to men into changing instead of creating action and making that on their own. That means that the feminist movement has less power of talking or pushing their ideologies on why women are getting oppressed and wrongly treated and why they're suffering from gender roles that are significantly less pushed under on-team government side of the house. It's only CO that tells you that the woman and the feminist movement on our side of the house can focus on their story onto themselves and talk about the oppression that they have actually went through. By attempting to abolish these gender roles, the focus of the movement is now shifted towards giving more opportunity to women, changing women's perception towards gender society instead of asking for men to change. This would also work reverse in countries that lack feminist movements under on-team government world. These societies are only going to get more gender roles. The best you're going to do is get peaceful protests begging men to be empathetic to the woman in the first place. In societies where men are already treated partially superior over women, this leads to worse backlash as well. Secondly, this is saying to women to be comfortable in their situation as housewives as long as their husbands are empathetic, which is why this just undermines the woman's capability in the first place as well. So what's the impact of this argument? This directly aligns with the goals of the feminist movement. The feminist movement allows women to gain more dignity and the feeling that they're the most important part of the movement as well. Therefore, even if we assume that we gain less societal support and changes, which is untrue, the mobilized attention we allow a large demographic of women to actually get empowered through the feminist movement by focusing on their stories and their hardships, emphasizing with the true marginalized stakeholders, which is why we empower women to the fullest extent. So even if some men won't be able to support our women, within a large demographic, within women, which is a large demographic on a social scale, which is 50%, if these kind of women obviously get recognition from general society and get empowerment and gain more dignity from the movement. Obviously, we think that this aligns with the goals of the feminist movement that I already told you that women will be able to get more dignity and also support because we get support from the women as well. This argument is exclusive as opening opposite stops from talking about women won't have equal opportunities, especially under an open government. We expand this more and talk about why the feminist movement under our side of the house does a better job of empowering women and fulfilling the role and the goal of the feminist movement in both ways as well. But lastly, quickly on why the current feminist movement is more effective and justified. On justification, this isn't about asking men to be a better person. Just you don't see the feminist movement asking women to be more empathetic or caring, right? This movement isn't about improving women's personalities, but women's rights. But lastly, on forceful impact especially, protests on women's rights were like boycotting forcibly when actual discrimination takes place on reasonable grounds. Let's take racism as a parallel example. The famous boycott of Rosa Parks and her black boycotting of buses and their racist system is justified. Why? Because it's their rights and becoming infringed and demanding for a reasonable and equitable result. But the biggest problem here is that feminist movement, when supporting positive masculinity, here is that it's not justified to forceful protest. But my web will expand more on this point. So proud to oppose.
I think something that was brought to us by my previous speaker that wasn't really mentioned by the opening or other sides of the house is about what the debate actually takes, where this debate takes place in. We believe that this debate takes place in order to help women or uplift women out of socially conservative countries that are not fully accepting of gender role abolishment. What does this look like? This looks like a conventional East Asia countries like China, Singapore, and Korea that understand the US like the gender, like they're a bit more accepting with regards to gender dynamics and a bit more willing about having gender roles being fluid and dynamic. But that isn't really what the debate is about because that feminine actualization has probably been achieved to a large extent in that area. What the debate is focusing on is rather about these socially conservative countries whereby feminist movements have to work within the bounds of these and engage not only just women but also men audiences. So we believe that in these countries the most harmful thing is when individuals or men use masculinity as excuse to exploit and abuse women because women have no idea of what a dynamic or healthy relationship can look like within the bounds of conventional gender roles. But understand that conventional gender roles doesn't necessarily mean that the woman has to submit to the man all the time, and the woman can necessarily have a part to play as well. But understand that if you allow conservative groups or you allow certain men to push forth the narrative that having like these gender roles is firmly linked to the man's dominance over the woman, then this means that you're not challenging them on aspect. And the fact of the matter is that if you're not engaging with the current social dynamic or the current social mentality which is possessed by a lot of individuals, then you're obviously not going to advance the cause of the feminist movement. Like, understand that within these countries, a lot of women actually buy into the idea that the husband is like superior in the household, for example, like Korea or like China. So understand that even these movements might not even get a lot of support from women, because some women might freak out at the thought of their husband staying at home and taking care of the babies, right? Like, understand that we are the side that produces an achievable goal and also a healthy understanding of women, because we prove that dynamic relationship can exist within the bounds. We also gave you a very exclusive mechanism of how gender and toxic masculinity plays into this, right? The whole reason why feminism in the third wave is failing is because men are trying to safeguard their perceived dominance over women. And in order to reduce toxic no thank you masculinity's chokehold on society, we need to remove the glorification of men and the idea that gender roles are firmly tied to the man having complete control over the woman. So what does this look like? This looks like the glorification of like the Byronic hero, whereby like the male character is like edgy and has like long hair and then like abuses the woman who like happily goes along with him, right? This looks like in household whereby the woman doesn't have any idea of what a normal healthy relationship should look like, and then the man uses the conventional idea of masculinity within their society to push and confine the woman to a little box. Like, we as feminists need to redefine this box, but we also have to take note that we have to work within the confines of social conservatism, right? They also told us about how like conservative or let's say like groups are going to be very offended by the fact that men have to be respectful to women. Like, this completely blows my mind, and I think a parallel that we can draw is like Trump and the conservative Republican evangelical Christian movement, right? Like, look at the stuff they are saying. We should protect and safeguard women. Like, yes, there's some like bigoted like dialogue there in the sense that women are the weaker sex, but that doesn't necessarily matter as long as there's some form of duty or acceptance to go and protect women, right? Like, we feel that this has to be achieved in order for women to achieve the full self-actualization that they actually do need. So I'll be going on to no thank you individual rebuttals for several teams. I think like OG has been whacked enough, so I'll whack OO. I feel that it's principally inconsistent that men in his world are going to be hard-headed and unwilling to compromise to so-called be nice, but at the same time they're also willing to accept like these like new redefined gender roles. Like, this completely blows my mind. Understand that like, yes, like asking men to be nice is like kind of a smaller step as compared to like completely redefining what the idea of a man and a woman is. Like, that is obviously quite a more achievable target as opposed to what they are proposing, right? They also accuse us that, we are going to turn on the sacrifices that the feminist movement made. But understand that these sacrifices have already been achieved in the status quo because the feminist movement was smart about it, right? Like, understand that the feminist movement has been incremental with approaches to how they are going to achieve their goals. So the first thing that they did was they tried to secure voter rights with regards so that they could be on equal status with men. The second thing that they did was they tried to fight for jobs, education, and equity. So we see that the feminist movement was successful insofar as they did not overreach and try to override the existing social dynamics that existed within like the society, right? Understand the feminist movement reached for achievable goals. So what you're doing when you are trying to reach for the stars and aim for this whole redefinition of what in the world a woman is, right, is that your gain is that you risk losing all the incremental support gain that has happened over the past like 100 years of feminism, right? You can always pivot to like redefining the idea of gender roles in the future. Like, we leave that open as like option. Like, maybe like 70 years later, countries won't be so conservative. But what happens when you try to force the idea of gender roles upon a country that is socially conservative, let's say China or let's say Korea, right, is that you're going to alienate the support that you have amassed over the years. And we think this is really counterintuitive to the extent that the support is very hard to win back, and the mechanism of how you're going to win back the support is going to be very problematic, which means that you're going to have to sort of compromise on your views to win back the support, and then that means that is essentially spitting on like the suffragettes or whatever nonsense that they try to peddle to us, right? They also told us about the hardcore feminists going to be alienated. depleted. I don't really see these are issues. Like the hardcore feminists are those that advocate like the beating and circumcision of men. Like if you go into those like hardcore feminist dialogues, so I don't really see a problem since the hardcore feminists are like the highest, not necessarily the lowest common denominator of feminism, but those like extremists. If extremists don't want to side with us, that's completely fine. So there's also point. No, thank you. There's also a point about dignity, about how it undermines a woman's capability, right? Like understand that being nice to a woman does not like debilitate you. Like understand that like allowing you to have some say in like financial decisions does not necessarily debilitate you, right? Like I don't understand how women who are struggling within the marital relationship are actually going to be able to redefine the whole idea of gender identity, right? Understand that women first have to achieve is like they first have to get the man to be nice to them in order to get them to buy into this idea of a whole change like gender identity. And there's also you also have to consider the fact that women are buying to the conventional ideas. Some women also buy the traditional ideas of masculinity, right? They don't necessarily accept that. So what have we proven? We have proven how it's better on men because we actually provide a systematic targeted argument to how we actually appeal to the desire for men to retain some amount of control while moving them towards a more agreeable standpoint from which we can negotiate in the future a better alternative for women. We provide examples on how men can achieve sex self-actualization within a healthy gender role relationship, and we also prove how we must first guarantee a positive marital relationship before full gender role like redefining can be achieved.
It's truly closing opposition side that fulfills the role of the feminist movement, the empowerment and empower them more. A few things I want to talk to my speech is first outboxing the opening side of this debate, equally engaging in both OG and OO, and proving why their clash is less important in today's debate, and proving why the closing part of today's debate is the most important clash and why we win over those clashes too. Now, right into engaging with the OG, let me quote them right away. We're going to ask the men to act differently, but we can't force them and their personality won't change, but we're still going to ask. Sure, when we asked that POI about positive masculinity, what they said was, me, I quote again, sure, we may agree, but because the movement won't be as forceful, so it's not going to be against too much of our cause. Judge, I believe this is pretty much the only summary that boxes OG perfectly out of today's debate. They mitigate their impact so much to the point that they conceded it would have a limited impact. All they're going to get in their best case with their soft lying tendencies is wasting resources, worsening conditions in countries that lack feminist movement, something my member explained very clearly. Judge, the only contribution of OG was to prove that because positive masculinity is now going to be a low impact, it's going to be okay. They're going to take a negative case on positive masculinity, which is why they lacked contribution and effect in today's debate. And now right on to engaging with OO. Their rebuttals on OG was on consistency of the principle of feminist movement. And now let's get their argument. Their first argument was on why we should guarantee opportunities for women and have a consistent principle. Second, we agree with this principle, Judge. We can see that the opening opposition did a wonderful job in explaining of the principle of the feminist movement. Thank you for that. But that's where our agreement ends, because, Judge, the main thing they stopped regarding was the most important stakeholder of today's debate. It's countries that lack feminist movements. A bit of characterizing here. Let's look at countries with currently advanced narratives of feminism and gender equality. But also, the main thing OO failed to do is completely fail to point out the most important point in today's debate. Let's look at America, South Korea, and countries that have extremely developed sense of gender equality. Let's be honest, we don't really need the movement right now here because the narrative is so strong in these countries with people hypersensitive about misogyny. We would say that the motion doesn't have as much impact in those countries compared to the stakeholder we are presenting right here, right now, that is Pakistan and countries that lack feminist movements. They are the ones being directly impacted by this motion. Then, Mr. Speaker, who is most impacted? It's countries that lack feminist movements. It's countries that are going to be receiving the narrative that affirms gender roles, but also forces and pressures men to act a certain way. We proved in our unique counterfactual that we have more justified, highly effective protests for a genuinely arguable woman rights, something that my member explained in his last extension too. Also, one of our extensions on why the closing government debate is more impactful. Judge, the main clash of the opening side of government was simply on the principle of how effective feminist movements would be if it had an opposing principle or a principle that opposes itself within the movement. We would say that's not the main point of today's debate. As OG said, the point of this motion is on the burden how effective would encouraging positive masculinity would help the feminist movement. We would say that only on closing can we properly weigh the true impact of this policy. Let me explain this by addressing the main clash. CG. Now, okay, our first clash is on who benefits from positive masculinity. Let me weigh the two differences of two different stakeholders of CG and CO that we both differently propose. Let's take a brief look at CG. What CG says is that in societies with a weak base of feminism and people are less sensitive to women's right up, what CG says is that because society already has a strengthened sense of social strengthened narrative of feminism, it's that men would actually benefit from this motion by being freed of their gender roles. That is the minimum stakeholder here. They are not as important as the countries that we are proposing, saying in societies with a weak base of feminism and people are less sensitive to women's rights, the only thing that the feminist movement will bring down is furthermore enforced gender roles that already exist. It's literally just asking men to be more nicer to them because they're superior, which shouldn't be the real goal of the feminist movement. And why is our stakeholder more important? The countries that are less sensitive about feminism are far more important, the conservative ones, because they're the will be impacted more based on enforced ideology of men and having more control of moment. And now, before I move on to my second clash, yes, I'll take that point.
Yeah, so how's your case not derivative from opening?
The only thing, because what opening said because what opening opposition is proposing is the principle as to why feminist movement shouldn't contradict ourselves. What we give is a proper mechanism as to why that wouldn't be feasible too, and why our clash is more important, because what they only engage with your side is on the principle of why feminist movement shouldn't contradict ourselves. What we prove, what I also prove my second argument, is that on the effect of these effect on the stakeholders that opening part failed to address. Now, second, even if the practical clash is not the most important in this debate, CO brings more contributive and effective points to this debate on the counterfactual. Okay, what I found completely untrue and also extremely hypocritical thought by the CG is that in countries that lack feminist movement or conservative places, encouraging for men to at least be nice in those households is the only way for women to gain the best advantage or make the best out of it. They asked us to engage, so let us engage. We propose a unique counterfactual that can completely outframe this. We proved why the current feminist movement without this new narrative is more effective and justified for two reasons. First, this isn't about asking men to become a better person for women. Judge, you don't see the feminist movement asking for women to be more empathetic or caring, right? The movement is about improving women's personalities, but women's rights. Asking men to improve their personalities is in fact impossible, but also too much of a step ahead. First thing you have to do is gain rights. And second one was our counterfactual on that we have an actual forceful impact. Because first thing about the motion is that you cannot force people to change their personalities. The one advantage we have over here is that we have a forceful impact through forceful protests that have forceful rights. Okay, look, protests on women's rights or like boycotting when actual discrimination takes place on reasonable grounds. Debate is a counterfactual, something that COO also failed to do, because that's when the feminist movement are completely justified to ask for protests in countries that lack feminist movement. They're forceful, they can boycott, they have enough material and resources to make it come true. When it comes to advocating for your rights to not be raped, abused, or being forced to be housewives and denied of jobs, it's in fact the one that has a forceful effect in today's day and has the most effect on countries that lack the feminist movement. Also, understand that the current feminist movement already has a huge amount of material and will also has expanding globalizing policy, meaning that even in conservative countries, they also have a reaching narrative of feminism, because the feminism movement is because the feminism movement's motivation is not to only fix their own country, but also the entire world itself. It is constantly improving and putting materials into conservative countries to ask them to change the narrative, and slowly doing that in a way. But asking for men to be nice is not going to work at all in that country, because men have the superior ground in that country. They get to choose whether they can be nice or not, which mitigates the complete impact of the government itself. So for CG to say that the best woman can settle with is for asking for men to be nice is not the right way, because when the feminist movement started, it didn't start from asking men to be nice. It started from forceful protests, and what we didn't settle was that we because our husbands are nice, we should just settle in. What we propose is a more forceful impact, a more globalized policy, and a huge and a more important impact on stakeholders that actually matter and are genuinely impacted by today's motion. So proud to oppose.